Hello and welcome to another show, Community Forum here in Stoughton. Our guest for this week is Andrew Flowers. Andrew is a labor economist at Appcast, which is the global leader in recruitment advertising ad technology. Last year, Andrew was a candidate for state representative in the 8th Norfolk District, which includes all of Sharon, parts of Walpole, Mansfield, and precincts 2, 3, 4, and 6 in Stoughton. He narrowly lost the Democratic primary with 48.2% of the vote, but he won a majority of the votes in Stoughton. He's also a local leader in Walpole, where he lives with his wife and young kids. Andrew, I welcome you to the Community Forum show. It's nice to have you on board.
It's great to be here, Roy. Thank you so much for having me again. It's been over a year since I've been on the program, but I really appreciate what you do, and I miss my my time that I spent last year in Stoughton.
Well, you know, most people when they run for office, they fade away. That has not been the case with you. You are constantly in the news or on Facebook or whatever. You're keeping your face in front of the public, which is pretty good. I mean, you have a lot of interesting points to make, and you show that you're very involved, and perhaps you'll make another run for it. But anyways, you ran for office last year and lost. How was that experience?
Yeah, I lost an election, and I have to say, you know, it's bittersweet. The bitter part is obvious, right? It sucks to to lose, right? And I was disappointed, but the sweet part of it, the bittersweet, is that I felt so grateful for all the people I met. I felt like this campaign really made an impact last year because a lot of people counted us out. We ran against the quote unquote machine, so to speak. You know, I wasn't the next one in line, the anointed successor. And with all due respect to the predecessor for our current state rep and my opponent last year, who were both good people, I just felt like our campaign really resonated, and it showed in the numbers, right? 48.2% of the vote. I won over 80% of the votes in my hometown. My opponent won just 65% of the votes in his hometown. It just was a challenge geographically with all of my opponent's town in the district, and I only had a quarter of Walpole. That said, one bright spot was Stoughton. I was really proud to have won a majority of the votes in Stoughton. But just to cut through all that, you know, spin, while it is disappointing to lose an election, you learn a ton. This is my first time running for office. You learn how to be authentic and not phony, because people are smart and they instantly recognize when you're not being genuine with them. If you're a kind of blow-dried, fake politician, people won't take you seriously. And so I learned to be comfortable being myself. And part of that, Roy, is people are going to challenge you. And some folks are going to tell you to your face that they're not going to vote for you. And I think it builds my character, and it builds anyone's character, when you can still shake their hand and respect them and have a nice conversation. And sometimes, honestly, even learn from them when you know that they are not supporting you. And that's just democracy. And now that I have over a year of perspective, that experience is really a beautiful thing, because while I can't say for sure whether I'll run again, I definitely encourage other people to. It was just an amazing experience. So yes, I lost, but I felt so grateful for all the support I got from my wife, my family, my friends, supporters in Stoughton and everywhere. And so all in all, I recommend it to other people. If you have the privilege, the capacity to take the plunge and do it, it was a really rewarding experience.
I think that definitely people should be encouraged to run. You have a similar situation going on in Boston, where they had a preliminary, and now they're having the final between the two highest vote getters. That's one of the major problems with politics, as I see it, either on a local or national level, that you have very few contested elections going on, and you wind up with the same old going on for years and years and years, which I think is, quite honestly, I think it's kind of unhealthy politically.
You're right. And it's particularly a problem here in Massachusetts. Mass Inc., which is this really smart think tank here in Massachusetts, released a report, I think about 2 years ago in 2019. And they talked about the sorry state of democracy in Massachusetts because the rates at which incumbents here get reelected are some of the highest in the nation. And the share of elections that go uncontested, to your point, Roy, are just, they're too high and it's disappointing. And I think there needs to be an attitude shift away from the machine politics of, well, we blindly have allegiance to those in power. We need to have more competitive races.
Yeah, that's for sure. We need them, and I don't know if it'll ever happen. You take a look at the national level. I was just reading about what is it, Senator Sinema. She's accepted a large amount of money from Big Pharma, like
Yes.
$700,000, and it changed her whole perspective on prescriptions and stuff, and the cost of prescriptions. I mean, she can't be a legitimate candidate if she's going to be bought and paid for. And I think that's the truth in a lot of cases where people are elected to do a job, but because somebody comes in with a whole lot of money, they change your way of thinking, and the results are that the country hurts because of it.
Yes,
It's a shame.
definitely.
It's a shame. Well, I have to tell you, I don't know if you remember or not, but about 30 years ago, I experienced the same downfall that you recently felt, and it wasn't a very comforting feeling to lose an election. I thought I did pretty well with it. I believe, if I remember correctly, I carried Stoughton, but lost Sharon because of the candidate being from Sharon. And that was very discouraging because I really think I had a lot to offer at the time. And I look at you as I'm saying to myself, this guy's got a lot to offer. He should make it. And I was very disappointed that you weren't able to make it. Not that it was your fault, because you certainly put on a beautiful campaign, but it's the way it goes. And you got to fight hard and hopefully make it in.
Thank you for the kind words, Roy, and thank you for your example of running in the 90s, because we needed folks to challenge the status quo, and we still need it today.
That's for sure. Well, what was your overall experience with Stoughton? You're an outsider. You're from Walpole, but you crossed the line and did very well. What was your experience?
My experience is that Stoughton voters are no nonsense, and they're practical and they're smart, and they really want solutions on concrete issues, no pun intended. So things like infrastructure, transportation, um, climate change, taxes. They want economic development of downtown Stoughton. Um, they want sustainability, right, to tie into climate change, because a lot of these issues that we face throughout Massachusetts affect Stoughton too. So Stoughton voters are really smart. I felt like there was a sense that the state was dragging its feet and not doing enough in terms of providing revitalized, commercial tax base for Stoughton. Now, part of that is local leadership, and I think there are a lot of strong local leaders in Stoughton, but the local government can only do so much. And there was definitely a desire when I spoke to voters in Stoughton to have creative solutions and not just the same old, same old. So I felt like that's what resonated with my campaign, and I think Stoughton has a lot to offer, and I think there's a lot of potential in the town.
Yeah, they certainly do. I've been involved in many ways in politics and organizations in Stoughton for about 40, 45 years, and never tired of it. I enjoyed the challenges of each and every one, looked at the jobs as opportunities, or the races as opportunities, won some, lost some, and you just keep marching. That's all.
Yeah, yeah, you gotta keep going. And again, Stoughton is blessed to be a part of the broader Greater Boston um, network, which is just an incredible place to live in terms of the job market, in terms of public education, um, and natural resources. So there's a lot of potential here. It's just that we need more creativity and we need more boldness. There's just so much timidity, right? Leadership is about leading, not following it. Often the state legislative leaders who've represented Stoughton, I think, have been very content and complacent with the status quo. And, whether it's reducing traffic on our roads, whether it's having better investment in our public safety facilities in Stoughton, whether it's zoning changes to allow commercial development downtown, South Coast Rail, a number of issues. It's just kind of plodded along, and it's kind of like Groundhog Day. Everything's the same 10 years later. And so that's where I think the frustration comes from when I speak to Stoughton voters.
Yeah, that's for sure. One thing that impressed me about you when you ran for office is that you gave up your job, your means of
Yeah.
income, and that was a tough thing to do. Most people, I think, would not take that step, but you're a believer, and you were hoping that you were going to be successful and then move on to the next part of your career. But that unfortunately did not happen, and I understand that you are now working in a new job. Why don't you tell us what's going on?
Yeah, I first had a really hard job that after I lost my election, and that job was watching my kids full time. I took a few months off to just spend time with my kids after the election. That's challenging. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, but that was really a blessing. So I fast forward to this summer. I joined a really great company based out of New Hampshire, and the company's called Appcast, AppCast, Appcast. And Appcast is the global leader in job advertising technology. So I am really lucky to be the first labor economist they've hired. And it's similar to my previous job that I quit to run for office. That job, I was an economist at Indeed.com. So if you ever look for jobs, you probably go and search Google or search Indeed.com. And so Indeed's the world's largest job board. But Appcast, what we do is we write software that allows employers to push their job advertisements onto Indeed, but also to 10,000 other job boards. So if you think about names like Monster or Career Builder or ZipRecruiter or even LinkedIn, the social network, all these sites across the internet allow companies to advertise their jobs. So say you're Starbucks, you want to advertise to hire baristas, or you're FedEx, you're trying to hire delivery drivers, and you want to come to Appcast because we have software that lets you do your job advertising efficiently across the whole internet. So I'm really blessed to be a part of the company. It's a great culture. I work out of the Needham office, so not far from Walpole. And as a labor economist, I really analyze our data, but also the government's data about the job market. What are the trends in hiring or quits of workers? What are the trends in wages across the country? So I am, just really happy the last 3 months to be a part of a really fast-growing, successful company, and back to doing what I love, which is analyzing data, communicating to the public, and doing all that on issues that matter, right? Because work is a really central part of life for almost all of us, and I hope it translates to the public service work I do in my own town.
Yeah. Well, why is it so difficult for companies to hire people in today's economy? I mean, there's the unemployment or people that are not working, that in jobs that begging for people to come to work. Why is it such a problem?
Yeah, it's a very unusual position we find ourselves in here in the U.S. job market, because part of it is just economics 101, supply and demand. And it's unusual in that right now, the demand for workers, and this can be approximated by job openings, right? There are almost 11 million job openings in the US, and that is an historic high. So the demand for workers by employers to hire is really high. That they have a lot of desire to hire workers, but the supply of workers, and a rough proxy for that is unemployed persons, which spiked really high in the early months of the COVID pandemic, like the spring of 2020. It spiked really high, but it's come down a lot since then. The supply of workers is about 8.4 million unemployed people as of last month in September. Well, the job openings are almost 11 million. So the demand for workers exceeds the supply. And so it's that simple. And that's what makes recruiting so challenging for all types of work, but especially work that's very sensitive to COVID. So what I find when I analyze data is that in sectors like restaurants and bars or other leisure and hospitality jobs or retail work, anything that's kind of face-to-face with customers, those sectors have really high job openings. And folks just don't feel like the pay is worth it to do that job at this moment. Now, there are other complicating factors, but the biggest force I find in the labor market right now is that COVID, the Delta variant, which spiked this summer of 2021, restrained some potential job seekers from re-entering the labor force. It kept, about 3 million fewer people in a labor force of 150 million, which is pretty big. But that 3 million matters compared to the pre-COVID era. We have 3 million fewer people even looking for work. And so that's a big factor right now, is that employers find it hard to hire. And I think COVID is a big reason.
Do you think that this influx of immigrants coming in through the border that we read about every day, do you think that would help if they can channel some of those into the lower markets that you're talking about?
There's a challenge that the U.S. faces demographically, right? So to just take a step back, our birth rates here in the U.S. are declining, like in many richer countries. As they develop, birth rates decline. And so our labor force growth is slowing. And actually last year, in the year 2020, the growth rate of the labor force in the U.S. went negative for the first time ever. So it actually started to shrink. Now, part of this is that the baby boomer generation is retiring and not working, and their kids and their grandkids, well, number one, those generations have fewer kids, but also number two, as they get greater levels of education, and so millennials and Gen Z generations, for example, are some of the highest educated generations ever. Those potential workers don't want to do some lower paid work. And so that's where immigration comes in. So to go back to your question, is because we shut our immigration spigot in terms of legal immigration, we really tightened it last year in 2020 because of COVID. What we find is for lower paid, lower skill work, like in construction, and also, the retail, the restaurant and bar kind of work, it's especially difficult to hire. And I think immigration is one important solution. And honestly, it's an important solution because it's about the economy. Because if we can't have productive workers, if employers just don't have a pool of hireable talent to find, then that restrains our economic growth. Now, I'm sidestepping the issue of illegal versus legal immigration because we have a really broken immigration system in this country that is beyond my pay grade in terms of how do we fix it. It has to be done at the federal level, right? There's little to anything we can do at the state and local level. But I think big picture, as an economist, we have lower birth rates. We have a declining labor force in the next few decades, and it could restrain our economic growth. And I think immigration, if we fix our immigration system, can help power our economic growth.
I would have to ask you, the major problems with unemployment or getting people to work pretty much has happened since COVID started. What about before that? I mean, we didn't have those problems before COVID, did we?
Well, it's actually a really good segue because one of my most unusual takes, so to speak, or perspectives, is that both the Biden administration and the Trump administration actually agreed on one very big thing. And we don't talk about this a lot, but they both agreed that monetary policy and fiscal policy, all the economic strategy should promote what economists call full employment. So the Trump administration and who they appointed to run the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, and now the Biden administration agrees that inflation can rise a little bit. That's okay if we drive down the unemployment rate. So to your point, before COVID even happened, those last few years before 2020, during the Trump administration, the labor market was extremely strong. It was actually, some of the lowest unemployment rates ever.
Right.
And part of that wasn't necessarily because of any tax cuts that Trump enacted or any regulations that Trump cut. A lot of it was just that Trump installed at the Federal Reserve Jerome Powell, who wanted to run the economy hot and tolerate higher inflation. And that's actually, and so this is my point, that's actually maybe the one bipartisan issue remaining that both Democrats and Republicans agree, yeah, we should have an economy after 3 or 4 decades where we wanted really low inflation and we tolerated higher unemployment. Now, both parties kind of agree we want the opposite. We want to have full employment, so that means low unemployment and slightly rising inflation. And that allows us to have a hot, full employment economy. And so the economy was very strong pre-COVID, or the labor market was very strong pre-COVID, but now it's extraordinarily tight is the word I think a lot of economists use, meaning it's difficult to hire.
Yeah, I know it's been a problem. Like down at Cape Cod, they rely a lot on people from other countries to come in and take care of those waitering jobs. It's a pretty tough situation that they got to figure out a way to solve it, I would say.
Yeah, I think whether through immigration or whether through an expanded social safety net that complements market labor, we can really help our economy by allowing those employers who just can't find workers to hire workers. And so what do I mean by that? Immigration increases the supply of workers. That alleviates the pressure, the competition for those job seekers. But when I say expand social safety net programs that complement market labor, what I mean is when you poll workers, when you survey people who are not in the labor force and you ask them, hey, why aren't you working? One of the top reasons is COVID, right? They're afraid of COVID, but right up there with fear of COVID in terms of people who don't want to enter the labor force is childcare challenges. So you see that this recession during COVID disproportionately impacted women, in particular working mothers, because childcare is not only very expensive in this country compared to other countries, it's more challenging logistically now because of COVID, right? There are fewer childcare centers open. You often have a kid who gets, sneezes and a sniffle and has to get sent home. And so if we want to hire more workers and improve our labor supply, well, women is working mothers is a good place to start. So part of the argument for universal childcare or universal pre-K is that it's not just good for the kids. It's not just good for the pocketbooks of young families because they're spending outrageous amounts compared to other countries on childcare. It's actually, so the argument goes, it's actually good for the economy because there's just a lot of working parents who don't find it worthwhile to work right now because childcare is just too burdensome. And if we free those people up, they can enter the labor force.
Yeah, if they don't feel like working, what do they do to generate revenue? You're not working, you're not making money. It seems like a lose-lose situation. If they go to work, they got to figure out a way to pay for the childcare, which I understand is pretty expensive. There's got to be an answer somehow. One of the things, I guess, that kept things sort of under control was the generous unemployment insurance given to those who lost their job. That just dried up recently, and now it's Now it's a situation of desperation, I would think.
Yeah, and there was a big debate this spring and summer that some folks argued, well, this extra generous unemployment insurance, that's what's causing the tight labor market. That's the explanation for why it's so hard to hire. And as an economist, we try to look, I try to look impartially at the data, and like a lot of other researchers, we find that those extra generous unemployment insurance benefits that expired around Labor Day, like you said last month, that they only explain a small share of this difficulty to hire puzzle. And so I would say it had a modest effect at best. Because just look at the September jobs numbers. Just look at the September employment report that came out early in October, and it showed that the labor force actually shrunk in September. Well, how does that make sense? If the unemployment benefits rolled off, you would expect more people to start looking for work. Well, in our data at Appcast and in a lot of other research I've seen is that you essentially compare the states that ended the generous unemployment insurance early to the states that kept it all the way through the summer, and you look at their job growth. And if you look at it at the chart, you kind of have to squint basically because they're the same. It really didn't have a big impact. Like I said earlier, the bigger explanations that make more sense in the data for why it's hard to hire people are COVID, childcare challenges, and yes, unemployment insurance. But that is kind of a distant third. I think that had a kind of a modest impact, maybe 10 to 20%. It explains that. So yeah, it helped people pay their bills and get through, and they spend that money, and that money goes back into the economy, and it helps the economy. So I don't think it had a negative impact on economic growth. It definitely didn't have a huge negative impact on hiring. So that's where we stand today. Those benefits have expired, and you know what? It's still a really challenging time for recruiters and employers who are trying to get talent.
Do you think that they'll bring the benefits back?
I think so because even President Biden didn't object to states ending them early. I mean, the labor market, the economy is so hot right now. We're seeing a huge bounce back in terms of GDP growth, in terms of wages, in terms of, hiring. While it slowed the last few months, it slowed in July or August and September because of the Delta variant. Hiring is still poised to really rebound strongly coming out of the COVID pandemic or the COVID recession last year. And so for 2021 and 2022, you see these high numbers of job openings. That reflects a great desire by employers to hire. And you see wages are rising strongly. They're up like 8%, 9% compared to just before COVID hit. So wages are rising. So I think the point is the economy is so strong, the labor market, the job market is so strong that there's not a lot of people, banging the table to bring back those those generous unemployment insurance benefits, because that was just a temporary saving grace during COVID.
Oh, interesting. Let's switch horses a little bit and talk about some of the things that interested you when you were running for office. The state needs to improve its public transportation system. How can they do it when ridership is down?
Yeah, this is maybe the greatest challenge that Massachusetts faces right now in this exact moment. Excuse me. So even before COVID hit, when I ran for office, when I started my campaign in January 2020, transportation was the number one issue because we had some of the worst rated traffic, not just in the country, but in the world, in the Boston area, in terms of road traffic. But then we had a decrepit, commuter rail system in T system and bus system that was unreliable and expensive, and there were derailments, and there still are. So transportation needed to be addressed pre-COVID. Well, during COVID, to your question, ridership plummeted just basically to zero at the worst months of the pandemic. Now it's rebounded a little bit, but it's actually, nowhere near, in terms of public transportation ridership, it's nowhere near what it was pre-pandemic, because some folks are just, working from home. They're working remotely through Zoom, like we're talking now, or they decided to drive or ride their bike because they don't want to be on a crowded bus or crowded train. So ultimately, though, the state has to still fix that kind of decaying infrastructure. And how do you do that when the revenue stream in terms of ridership is down? I think that the state has a huge pot of money, over $5 billion, I believe, from the federal government that hasn't even been doled out yet to the state or to the local governments. That money came from the American Rescue Plan that was passed earlier this year in early 2021. So that, I think it's $5.4 billion. The state legislature and the governor, frankly, have dithered for months, they're kind of negotiating with themselves about who gets what. And so that's a big pot of money. And then the other big pot of money, frankly, is our normal tax revenues. Like, I have to say, as an economist, in 2020, I thought we were in for a deep, long recession because of the coronavirus. Luckily, because of all the ingenuity and innovation in America and companies like Pfizer and Moderna, we got these vaccines with astonishing speed. And so because of the vaccines, we've had this economy that surprised everyone, myself included. It's bounced back very strong. And so tax revenues in Massachusetts are, believe it or not, near all-time high. So the state has a lot of money from the federal government, $5 billion. It has a lot of money in its coffers. So we have a lot of money and we have a decaying transportation system. Ridership is down right now because of COVID, because people are skittish until, cases really fully go away or vaccine uptake becomes near universal. People are skittish to ride public transportation. Frankly, I just think this is where we need bold leadership at the State House. We need to just do the infrastructure investments anyway. I actually think now is the perfect time. If there's not a lot of ridership, and we see our roads are, by the way, I'm sure you see this, Roy, traffic is back to normal on the roads. Traffic is it's just as bad as it was pre-COVID. So people are driving for sure. And we have those needs are going unmet. So we need to improve our infrastructure to reduce congestion on our roads. And I think let's make the big investments in electric rail and electric buses, because transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Massachusetts. So if we're ever going to meet our climate change goals, we have to upgrade our transportation infrastructure now anyway. So let's do it. We have the money. Ridership is down. Who cares if we're not actually making these programs work in this current moment, because ridership is down. Ridership will recover. It's kind of like the movie Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. Well, if we build a fast, reliable public transportation network, people will ride it, because it's just a lot easier to ride on an electric train or an electric bus that comes every 20, 30 minutes and takes you where you need to go. And if it's affordable, you'll pay that money. Ridership will rebound, and we'll be able to make it a sustainable model, because what works now is not sustainable.
I think you're talking about long-term solutions there with the new construction of electric trains and stuff like that. I noticed what you're saying about the riders taking advantage of our system lately. During the pandemic, I ride by the Stoughton train station, maybe see 7 or 8 cars in a largely empty parking lot. But over the last week or so, it looks like a lot more people are jumping on the train now, finally.
Finally, hopefully with Delta cases kind of subsiding, knock on wood, we see ridership tick up. But either way, this is a problem that's not going away. It's kind of like a leaky roof. Just because it's not raining doesn't mean you don't need to fix it.
No, time to make it happen. I don't know who you push to get these decisions to be made, but that needs to be done. And I think that if you were in there, you would have taken care of that. But unfortunately, you're not. But maybe another day you'll decide to do it again. On the subject of housing, the governor signed a landmark housing choice bill earlier this year. In your campaign, you supported this legislation. What impact will it have on the greater Boston area and on Stoughton specifically?
Yeah, to be clear, I ran in the Democratic primary, and excuse me, I'm a registered Democrat, but I think our Republican governor, Charlie Baker, has for several years now touted this piece of legislation that finally, after years, came to fruition. The legislature dragged their feet. They watered it down a little bit, but they passed it early in January of this year. And so this is a really amazing bill. I have to congratulate the legislature and the governor. So this is bipartisan. And what the housing choice bill does, it recognizes that we have a big housing problem in Massachusetts. The ratio of people's incomes to the house prices has gone up tremendously in the last few generations. So it's just not as affordable in terms of home ownership. Young families are stretching themselves to even buy starter homes in a lot of communities, even like Stoughton. And rents for renters are some of the highest in the nation in this area. So long story short, the housing choice bill, what it does is it changes how we do zoning. And right now in Massachusetts, every city and town requires a 2/3 supermajority at town meeting or on a city council to change zoning bylaws. And this bill that the governor signed allows a lot of zoning changes, not all of them, but a lot of them to go to a simple majority vote, which I think totally makes sense. It means that you don't have a minority of folks who stop change. And let's talk about Stoughton. Downtown Stoughton has a lot of potential. You have a train station. You're in Massachusetts near a great job market. A lot of companies. You have a good school system. You want to attract families and workers. You want to attract businesses in downtown Stoughton. And one of the conversations I had with the town manager, with planners in Stoughton, with voters throughout my campaign was that, gosh, why can't we have more business development in downtown Stoughton? And when I talked to the experts, they would identify the zoning overlay districts and really onerous parking requirements and difficulties for developers to start businesses to do redevelopment in downtown Stoughton. They basically identified zoning as the problem. And so if you want to fix downtown Stoughton, you need to start with the zoning. And one of the big impediments to that were these unnecessary obstacles to growth. And I believe, yeah, I'm a progressive, but I'm a pro-growth progressive. I'm a capitalist. I'm an economist. I think we need to have more business development in all our communities in downtown Stoughton. And when we allow our zoning, which we control at the local level, when we allow our zoning to restrain our business growth, that's nonsense. And our governor recognized that. So I think the housing choice bill is one of the most impressive things the legislature has done. Even though I'm very critical of the State House, I think Beacon Hill does deserve a slow clap for passing that bill. Now, it could be better, and we could talk about that some other time, but I think I'm optimistic because it encourages things like, and this is the last thing I'll say on the bill, and encourages smart growth districts or 40R districts, which allow for the mixed middle housing. So some density or mixed use development, like in downtown Stoughton, having retail on the first floor, having apartment buildings or multifamily housing or condos above it. And so smart growth districts that are near, doing development near public transit. It's good for climate change. It's good for transportation because you need less parking. It relieves congestion, and you increase the pedestrian traffic. Like in downtown Stoughton, that's what attracts businesses. So I'm optimistic. I think Stoughton, the leadership at the local level, should take advantage of this law and start to fix some of the zoning problems you have in Stoughton.
That would be nice. It's been a long time of inaction taking place, and it would be nice to see the growth start to happen downtown, because I think that once we get downtown going, then the rest of it would fall into place.
Yes, You have so much potential. It's really about the downtown.
Yeah, we just need a couple of projects to get kicked into action, and then maybe we'll see some good stuff happening. How about climate change? That's another subject that's been in the news a lot lately. The state passed a, big climate change bill this year. In your opinion, is it an adequate response? And can you explain a little bit about it for us?
Yeah. So the the legislature passed a climate change bill that um, to get bottom line up front to give you my takeaway. I don't think it was a fully adequate response, but it was a step in the right direction. And it wanted to have net zero carbon emissions by 2050 in the state. It allowed for clean energy credits, more efficient building codes. It did a whole slew of things. It will hopefully lead the way to investments in wind energy in Massachusetts, which, by the way, that's a huge business opportunity. We have companies, multinational companies from Denmark, from Canada, from Asia, who are wanting to invest outside of Fall River, outside of New Bedford, outside of the Cape in terms of wind energy. It's clean, and we have some of the highest potential for offshore wind energy. So all this to say, this goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050, that's what the state passed. It's a good step. And again, we hadn't done anything for 13 years. It wasn't until I think 2008, the state passed the Global Warming Solutions Act. And for 13 years, we hadn't done anything. So there's a lot of push by advocates to tackle climate change, to take it more seriously in Massachusetts, including by people like myself. There's a lot of push for years, and there wasn't much action. So the legislature passed this bill. And while it's good, the science tells us we need to do more. 2050 is just not soon enough. And we have the potential, at least with our electricity grid, to go to 100% clean electricity, which again, electricity is the biggest part of our carbon emissions, but it's not all of it. We can have 100% clean electricity much sooner. So by 2030, by 2035, at least, we have a bill actually in the legislature that just hasn't even gone up for a vote, that I think has a lot of sensible steps, including one that is a carbon tax program where you would raise revenue by pricing carbon. You would tax carbon emissions, but then you would rebate those tax revenues to businesses and to households who pay. So essentially, households who use oil and natural gas to heat their home, they would pay higher taxes in terms of carbon taxes, but they would receive rebates. Particularly low and middle income households would receive rebates through this carbon tax bill. So I think those bills, the 100% clean electricity, the carbon tax bills, those are the ambitious bills that, again, maybe you disagree that it would hurt our working families too hard. I would disagree with that, but say you disagree with me. My frustration is that the State House, the reason they haven't been adequate in their response to climate change is they won't even allow this to have a full debate. They won't allow those those bills to go up for a vote, which ties into another issue that I ran. A big part of my campaign was transparency. And so, yeah, I think the bill is a good first step to answer your question, but climate change, it's going to impact us because, while we're not California and we don't have the wildfires that California has, and we don't have the drought that Oklahoma has, we are going to experience higher and higher precipitation events. We're going to experience coastal erosion with rising sea levels, so inundation with storm surges for our coastal areas like the Cape and islands that are a huge tourism driver of our economy. They're going to be inundated with coastal surge and erosion, but also because of the precipitation is rising. This area, almost across the globe, actually, New England is forecasted to have greater precipitation events. So not snowstorms, because things are warming up here, but just greater flooding potential. And so we need to do more climate change mitigation, because flooding is going to increasingly be a part of our Massachusetts future, and we need to adapt to that. So I think there are lots of ways we could have a more robust response, but again, it goes down to the lack of political will, the timidity, the complacency, people who don't even want to debate these ambitious ideas on Beacon Hill on the State House floor.
Why?
It's
Why don't they
transparency.
want
I
to
mean,
debate- Why don't they want to debate the issues?
because it's a very top-down organization, and the leadership in the House and Senate, but particularly the House, is compromised in that, given their kind of iron-fisted control of leadership over the rank and file members, they can dictate the flow of legislation. And rank and file kind of average state reps and state senators don't get to have their bills, whether it's a good idea, like on climate change, they don't get to have their bills really see the light of day. Yes, there are hearings for bills, and people can testify and speak and submit written testimony, but those bills, session after session, they never have a vote. State reps and state senators can then slide by. They can elide the whole debate by saying, yeah, I'm for that. They can be for everything. In other words, the current system where you have a tight leadership control that prevents votes from happening, they do that because it allows their members who just kind of follow along obediently to never take tough votes. They never get to have to give up and have a speech and debate the issue and take a no vote, because they really want to avoid saying as little as possible. What I found is that most state legislators don't want to do much, partly because they're lazy, frankly, but also partly because they just don't, they'd rather not talk about issues and substantive ideas. They'd rather just glad hand and go and take photos at, ribbon cutting events. And I'm being on, I know I'm being kind of caustic here, but it's the truth. A lot of them, they like the system that's opaque at the State House. They like the system where they have no power and they just let the leadership, the Speaker of the House or the Senate President, control everything, because it shields them from taking any tough votes.
Oh man, that sounds like national situation also, which is a whole nother subject, I guess. But with the climate change and the rising sea levels, a lot of Boston is going to have some problems, with all this new construction going on and the rising water levels. You're going to have a lot of flooding going on in downtown. Are there any plans to build walls or anything to hold the water back?
Well, at the local level, I'm not as familiar with what the city of Boston is doing. I mean, I followed some of their mitigation efforts, and in the climate change bill passed earlier this year by the legislature, there is greater funding and a renewed effort to do mitigation planning at the local level. So here in Walpole, for example, I'm on the master plan committee. We're redoing our 20-year-old master plan here, and sustainability and climate resiliency is a big part of that. And so there's lots of grants, there's lots of funding to do it at the local level. But for the seaport, for the low-lying areas that are most exposed to rising sea levels, yeah, there's just a whole slew of options that are costly in terms of mitigating coastal erosion, inundation, storm surge. They're costly, but my argument always is, when you look at the forecast, when you look at the cost not to do it, it's really the cost of inaction that is greater. Again, it's the analogy with the hole in your roof. Yeah, it's costly to repair a new roof, but it's worse when it destroys your home in a hurricane because you don't have a good roof.
Yeah, that's issues that need to be worked on. I guess you got to get some of these guys to put some guts into their thought process and start doing things that are going to benefit the Commonwealth or the constituencies, instead of doing nothing. That really bothers me a lot, and I'm sure that bothers you, and could be a reason for you again to jump in the fray again. So transparency at the State House, that was a big part of your campaign. Where does that issue stand now? I mean,
It is sadly lacking. And just to give folks a context here, Massachusetts is one of the least transparent legislatures in the country. What do I mean by that? We have really poor open records laws in terms of requesting information on how the State House operates. They're shielded from a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests. But even worse, in my opinion, is how, as I mentioned earlier, how the State House votes, or rather doesn't vote. So a lot of committee level votes are where most bills die, because few bills actually make it to the House floor or the Senate floor on Beacon Hill. These committee level votes, as I've harped on for the last few years, are in many cases secret and unrecordable. So there have been very tepid reforms this year that were put forth by House leadership and Senate leadership. Actually, I should correct myself. The Senate has done a great job. The Senate, the state Senate, has led in terms of saying, hey, we'll publish all our votes. Because the bottom line, Roy, is you as a voter, we as a voter, as voters, deserve to know how our state reps vote. And especially on the bills that never see the light of day, because they just die in these study order votes where they essentially say, nah, we're not going to even consider this 2-year session. And so it's the House where a lot of these secret committee votes cause the main problem, again, because of this top-down leadership style. So this year, there were just frankly some really disingenuous debates and exchanges on the State House floor. Representative Erica Eiderhoven out of Somerville and a few other state reps put forth really bold amendments to change the House rules, both in February and in June, July, to allow committee votes to be made public and to allow testimony to be made public, to allow more advanced notice before a bill is voted on, more advanced notice for state reps in terms of when an amendment to a bill is proposed. Because right now, everything is crammed and rushed. It's so common these days for state reps to be told, like it's North Korea, we're going to vote on a bill in 4 hours. Here's the bill. You got to vote for it. It's 100 pages. You don't even have time to read it, but you got to vote for it. And it's ridiculous. And then furthermore, these state reps get to kind of, willingly participate in a system where they get to go to the clam bakes and the Boy Scout events, and do the photo ops. But when it comes to the committee votes, they're held secret. They get to say, oh, I support that bill. Maybe it's climate change, 100% renewable energy by 2030, or maybe it's, comprehensive sex education in our schools, or maybe it's the Safe Communities Act to protect, our immigrants, our immigrant neighbors. And you can disagree with me on some of these bills, but my point is, on a number of bills, there's a huge constituency and a lot of people in the State House who say that they support it, but they want to be a part of a system where leadership shields them from ever taking those votes. And how do they do that? By having a system where committee votes are secret. And so the transparency, frankly, the Act on Mass organization has been pushing this summer and and earlier this year. And sadly, both of Stoughton's state reps and a lot of state reps, even in the so-called progressive caucus, have opposed these common sense transparency measures. And it's just, it's really disheartening. So we're in a sad place right now.
What are they afraid of? What are they afraid of?
They're afraid of electoral consequences. So they're afraid of taking a vote on, say it's a progressive bill. Well, if they're a Democrat and they vote against it, they're afraid of someone challenging them from the left in a progressive primary. Or say it's a progressive bill and they vote for it, they're afraid of a Republican beating them in the general election. Either way, what they find makes the best sense for their career politically is to do nothing, is to do the status quo. So to never go out on a limb and take a hard vote, that's what's best for them, because they can come back to their district like Stoughton state reps do and say, oh yeah, look, I got this $40,000 grant in the budget. I got an earmark in the budget. And they can seem like they're rewarding the district and continue to do the photo ops when really they're just complacent with a lack of bold action. And we could have a state house that is really truly democratic, that's transparent, but we don't. And it's just the incentives for state reps to just take the paycheck, maybe do a side job like a lot of state reps do for decades, and just kind of go along to get along.
Yeah, well, that's not good. There should be some way to publicize the report cards, publicize the yay and nay votes, and let people out there who are interested, and that should be everybody, know exactly what their reps are doing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely is right. All right, Andrew, we got couple more minutes to go here. What advice do you have for those considering running for public office in Stoughton, Walpole, or any place? What advice do you have for them?
My advice is you're going to find a lot of people who tell you that your incumbent state rep or state senator or your incumbent select board or school committee person, they're going to tell you they can't be beaten. And my advice to you is ignore them. Ignore them and run anyway. And the reason you should run is we have, as you mentioned, Roy, a really complacent political culture in Massachusetts, a machine system, and I say this as a Democrat, a machine system that needs a kick in the pants, that it needs to be enlivened with bolder people of all ideologies, of all perspectives. We need people who actually are not followers like so many people on Beacon Hill are. We need leaders. So my advice is don't be afraid of these folks. They're scared. If you want to run against them, they are terrified, and do it because they need to be scared. They need to be scared.
Well, my suggestion to you was keep your feet in the fire there. I hope you'll consider running again and get in there and make the change that needs to be made. You're a shining star. You had the potential, and I'm sad that you didn't make it, but there's always another time. Andrew, I want to thank you very much for giving me the hour. I know you're very busy, but I appreciate your coming on the show with me, and I wish you the best of luck. And we'll see you in another time.
Thank you so much, Roy, for having me. It was a great pleasure.
Okay. And Roy Cohan saying thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.